All right, what's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to a very special episode of Beyond UX Design Live. I have got the one and only Joe Natoli here, and we are here to help today to raise money for the victims of the Altadena fires out in LA. And more specifically, we are helping today to raise money for the Byrd family who lost literally everything but the clothes on their back this week in LA. And we are trying to raise $250,000 to help the Byrd family rebuild their homes. So check out the QR code here. The link is in the comments and the link is in the description of the event. Please go and thank you. Whoever just did that, scan that QR code. Really appreciate that. We are trying to raise $1,000 today. And Joe and I are going to be giving away some stuff to the top donors. Joe, what do you had a bunch of stuff you were going to give away? What were you?
Yeah. Well, what I'm going to do is we're going to give away a couple memberships, 1-year memberships to my UX 365 Academy. I'll do a free VIP membership for the top donor today, and then we'll do a free 1-year basic membership for whoever comes in second.
Right on. Awesome. I appreciate that. That's awesome. And I'm going to be giving away a bundle from my book, the print and digital version of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes for the top donors as well. So please, we will keep the QR code up over here in the top left-hand corner. And again, the link is in the description. Please go to the GoFundMe and help the Byrd family. And also any other family as well that we've been raising money for this week. If you head on over to Lex Roman or Hong Shu's LinkedIn page, they've got events from the entire week, other awesome creators, designers hanging out, doing the same thing. And please, we would greatly appreciate that. And so we're hanging out today for a good cause. Joe, we are going to talk today about the business, the biz. What does the biz mean? You always hear designers talking about, I got to balance user needs and business needs, like as if they're two, diametrically opposed things.
Yeah.
But we're going to dig into that today. I am so excited. Joe, I don't think Joe necessarily needs an introduction, but I got a short bio I'm going to read anyway. Joe is a renowned UX consultant, author, and speaker with 30 years of experience advising major companies and government agencies. He's published 10 books, including a best-selling collaboration with Leah Bully, and is a frequent keynote speaker. Through his online courses and UX 365 Academy, he's taught over 350,000 students, which is impressive, man. Impressive. His work focuses on improving UX, addressing systemic issues like imposter syndrome, poor communication, and dysfunctional processes. And he lives out in DC, and you can check him out at givegoodux.com. So, Joe, thank you so much for the last minute. I think we talked yesterday, at like 3 or 4 p.m. And so we threw this thing together last minute. I'm so excited. I really appreciate you offering to do this. All right. So the business, you do this as a consultant constantly. You're working with a lot of large and small design teams. I'm curious, when someone says the business, I need to understand. You hear that a lot, like designers need to understand business. It's like, understand code or understand the business. I guess you got to pick one. But when you hear that term, the business, I'm curious what you think. What does that mean? And what comes to your mind when someone says that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what comes to mind is my definition. Essentially, the business side of the house, whatever you want to call it, is everything outside us. Essentially, I mean, everything that's outside product design and product development. Because, I mean, even though we're there sort of serving business aspects as well, the thing is that everybody else outside of that circle has a charter, has a mission, has an absolute imperative list of things that have to be accomplished that quite frankly have nothing to do with the work that we're doing in a lot of ways. Okay. There are so many layers of communication and initiative and intention and motivations, some of which are personal, some of which are political, some of which are professional, of course, financially motivated. But we're not privy to those things, and for any number of reasons. All right. Partly that's us being focused on our own thing. Partly it's this nature of the structure of an organization and that we're left out of a lot of those discussions and conversations. And I think designers and UXers of all kinds are historically kind of not taught anything about how a business runs and the infrastructure and ecosystem that exists inside a corporate entity. And it's kind of a shame because I think it's part of the reason, you and I have had this conversation before, it's part of the reason we run into walls. It's part of the reason we run into opposition. It's part of the reason we're walking around with bloody noses all the time. It's why everything is 3 times harder than it needs to be to some degree. There's a whole lot that goes on, especially when you're told no, or we don't have time for that. We don't have the budget for that. We don't have the personnel for that. We take all that very personally. And the reality, to my eye and in my experience, is that those decisions pretty much have nothing to do with you.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a big ball of wax when you say, what's the business? I mean, man, I don't know. It's everything that's not us.
Well, the thing that I find interesting about that term when people say it is it's like you could pick one. You pick the business or you pick the users. You can't have both. And what's weird to me about that is, you say that, or I hear people say that as if, the users are against the business or the business is somehow against the users. It's like,
false.
You can't make money if the users aren't happy. And so I've always found it odd when people talk about that sort of like as if they're two opposing things.
Yeah.
Actually, you mentioned this a second ago. We're often taught about, art or actually take a step back. A lot of UX, outside of boot camps, obviously, but 4-year programs, they sit within the art school. UX design
always.
often. And so there's that sort of, artsy fartsy kind of, let's all hug it out kind of stuff happening in the design school under the art program. And but you've got, people going through, business programs and MBAs that are not really learning those things. And so there's often this sort of headbutting. And I'm curious, like, I know you can't solve this, but I'm curious, is that something that you see as a problem, that education disconnect between learning things through the design to art school versus the business?
Traditional education, especially on both sides, by the way. To this day in MBA programs, I mean, there's very little taught about product design, which if you think about it, in 2025 is insane.
Right.
Every single thing that goes out into the world is now mediated electronically somehow. Okay. It's an app, it's a site, it's a system. I mean, everything. I can't think of a single example where something doesn't involve technology and software and a product of some sort. Even if your core business is a service, it's still productized in some way. This is not talked about at all. You have people who are business analysts still learning traditional business analysis, completely removed from user and customer experience and product design. That's insane to me.
Yeah.
By the same token, you nailed it. All right. I've taught university part-time since 1993. Okay. Off and on. I've been in a lot of different places. It's nobody's fault, okay, because the instructors and the directors and everybody's doing the best they can, but the curriculum is behind the curve in a big way for lots of reasons. All right. And like any other institution, some of that is political as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's difficult for us because we get thrown into this world that we're not prepared for at all. Okay. When you get your first corporate job, I have yet to talk to a single person who wasn't to some degree, this is extreme. I was going to say shell shocked. Okay. But there's always some level of like, what the, what's happening here? Like I was sort of had this idea that design works like this and product design works like this. And the way we all work together is A, B, and C, and it doesn't happen. I mean, I spend an inordinate amount of time coaching people, even in consulting gigs, when I'm talking to clients' product teams. Half of what I'm doing is therapy. Okay, to say, they're saying it's like, we don't know what to do about this, and I'm trying to catch them up to speed really quickly and saying, look, the reason you're getting opposition is this. It's not because they don't believe in what you're doing. Y'all wouldn't have jobs if they didn't believe that product design mattered or UX, was important or whatever. It's that there's all this other shit that is on their list that is more important, quite frankly, than good design and good UX. And if they can mitigate their losses in a short-term way, and it alleviates that pressure, alleviates that pain, gets that VP his bonus, whatever. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's what gets played out.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. We talked a second ago about the education system being broken, and I think it's worth sort of acknowledging, what we can and can't control. I don't think designers are going to be able to control, at least in the short term,
No.
control that. So you've been put in this situation where you haven't been prepared for the corporate world. And, you've got these design teams, you're working with a lot of them. I'm curious, what types of things are you seeing play out on a regular basis, maybe an average? I don't want to give away any NDAs or anything you've seen firsthand, but average it out. What are you seeing on these design teams because they aren't prepared? Like what's the outcome for maybe the business, the customers, the design team, everything? What are you seeing?
They get told no a lot.
Yeah.
Number one, I mean, things that are proposed, good ideas, solid ideas. We need to do research. We need to talk to these customers. We need to talk to these users. And the answer is no, don't have time. We gotta hit this milestone by the end of the sprint. Requirements, sprint planning is being done without product designers and UXers at the table. There's this charge ahead mentality of we got to hit these marks. So there's a lot of no. There's a lot of that. And the problem, one of the problems I should say, is that those people on that team, product designers, UXers, start to feel like it's them. Okay. They take that very personally. It's like, well, it must be me. Like, I'm obviously not very good at my job if I can't convince anybody to do research, right? If none of these proposals ever go through, it must be me. And that's false. It's false. It has everything to do, 9 times out of 10, I swear to you, okay, for as long as I've been doing this, a lot of it is in how you pitch the story.
Okay. So I love that. So let me ask you this. This is where I was going to go with this next. I'm glad you went there. Do you feel like a lot of these design teams are actually making it harder on themselves and how they approach the relationships, the problems, the work, and all that stuff?
Yep.
You feel like they're making it harder on themselves?
Not on purpose.
Right. Well, right. Yeah.
Not on purpose. Everybody's doing what they think they're supposed to do. We're advocating for things that we believe in and that we know to be true. So I'm not faulting anybody.
Right.
For that. But you're talking to somebody who, to some degree, is pretending to understand what you're telling them. Number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, doesn't necessarily have a vested interest in that outcome unless it connects to something that they already want, which may or may not be on the table. Okay. Like I said, a lot of this is political and it's personal. It has nothing to do, quite frankly, with the overarching business goals. I've been plenty of those situations. So a lot of times what I do, and I counsel teams to do the same thing. When you're getting opposition from somebody, and you got to gauge this, whether you can do it publicly or whether you can do it one-on-one with them. As a side note, I say, look, tell me what you want. At the end of 2 weeks, at the end of 2 months, at the end of 6 months, at whatever, what do you want to happen? What has to happen for you to feel like this was a good use of our time? This went well. I'm glad we did this work, whatever it is. What do you want? And a lot of times the first answer I get will be a business answer. Okay. It'll be the stock. Well, our goals for the quarter are, and a lot of times I'll say point blank, not what I'm asking you. What do you want? You personally, what needs to happen for you to feel good and confident and secure and whatever by the end of, again, this period? I usually get a very different answer to that question. Yeah. And that answer has something to do with what they're on the hook for that nobody knows about. It has to do with possible looming layoffs if certain milestones aren't met. It has to do with budget allocation, where a certain amount was allocated last quarter and the return didn't come. And now that person is on the hook, like produce or go somewhere else. It's all sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. All right. So here's the next question. We're often not having those conversations, I think. So this is maybe an answer to one of the answers to this question. But I think, we are doing it to ourselves, and I think there's opportunity for us to improve. And I'm curious, like, what is it that you think people are doing wrong a lot of times?
I'll
again,
speak to
not
that.
on purpose, but what are they doing? What are they doing wrong that they shouldn't be doing and making it worse?
Well, for example, there's a story I tell in one of the talks I give about, a lot of times when I work with teams, my job is to kind of, sometimes I'm in the foreground, sometimes in the background, right? So I'm helping them day to day. And then when there are meetings, when they have to present to, their product managers or the VPs or whoever, I'm in the room, but I'm hanging back because it's not my place necessarily in some situations to be given that pitch. Depends on what they hire me for. So in this case, I'm just kind of there as a coach. So I'm hanging back and I'm watching these two guys give this presentation. There was a mandate that said, we have got to cut this cost by this percentage in this span of time, or we're dead. The product is dead. Team is probably dead. We may relocate these people. We don't know. Okay. So everybody is fully aware of what the stakes are. So these two guys are giving their pitch about how to solve this problem, how to cut support costs, because it's happening at a certain point in the app. And what they're doing is they're giving a UX 101 presentation, and they're explaining all the reasons why it's important. We want to do this research. We want to do blah, blah, blah. And they're trying to convince these stakeholders and the CFO in particular, they're trying to educate them about UX and why this stuff is important. And this person is getting, her face is going like this the longer this goes on. All right. And finally she can't take anymore. And she goes, okay, look, I get all that. Why do I care about any of it? And they were like, she's like, I've heard a whole lot of stuff so far. What I have not heard is how this cuts our costs. And they had a moment. I mean, and I felt horrible. Like I kind of wanted to disappear as well. To their credit, they regained their composure and they said, oh, okay, well, here's the deal. What's happening is people are getting to this stage and they're doing this and they're expecting A, B, and C, and we're not giving it to them. So we feel like if we spend a week doing these specific things, we feel like that's not going to happen anymore. So that would cut, we feel like this has the potential to cut this cost by what? So she relaxes and she's like, okay, I agree with that. Let's do it. So the problem wasn't that they were saying that it was untrue. The problem was they didn't lead with the biggest thing that was on her mind and on everybody on the business side of the house's mind, which is how the hell are we going to make this number move?
Yeah.
That has to be first.
Right.
The business outcome has to be first. Like I always say to people, and I get faces when I say this, I say business first, users second. If those people don't hear themselves and their concerns reflected in the very first thing out of your mouth, you're already losing the battle.
Yeah.
Again, either they don't understand what you're saying, because a lot of times people will nod and be like, they have no fucking idea what you're talking about. Believe me.
Right.
Or it just doesn't answer the question for them because they kind of don't get it. They have to work really hard to understand. So it's often stuff like that. Researchers, for example, and I don't fault them because this is what they're being asked to do. I can't tell you how many researchers I've talked to where they're like, they want us to deliver a recommendations report, literally a document. And they're like, well, nobody reads it. We deliver it.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody reads it. And then they argue with us about what we're supposed to do, which is a ridiculous situation. I completely agree. The real problem, if you look at these documents, is that researchers are doing what they're trained to do in the way they're being trained to do it. What's missing for people who either don't give a shit or don't get any of this is a page one that says, here's what we learned. Here's what it means. Here's what I think we should do.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's how this impacts us. Because what all those people who are too busy to read this are thinking is, just tell me what this is supposed to do. How are you mitigating my risk here? Because I got to take this bet anyway. How are you minimizing the risk that this bet is, I'm going to lose my shirt?
Right.
That's what they want to know. That has to be first. You can talk about the rigor of the research and why these results are trustworthy, right? And why we can rely on all this. And you can do all that. It's secondary.
Yeah, I love it. Well, you know what? The thing I'm immediately thinking of, and this is, again, I'd love to get your thoughts here, is, as designers, you just mentioned, business first, user second, and it's often opposite. We've got high empathy for users. We care about users first, fight for the user. Yeah, fight for the user. And we talk about empathy all the time, empathy for users. But what I see constantly is the lack of empathy for the team, especially for the leadership team, and in this case, quote unquote, the business.
Correct.
And so empathy for the CEO, empathy for the CFO in the case of your example. And I don't mean empathy for the person. You don't have to empathize for them. They're probably driving Beamers and all that stuff. But what I'm talking about is empathy for the position. Right. Empathy for the position and the stress and the strain and It's interesting because going back to the thing you mentioned in the beginning, when you get down to the very core of it, it's I'm on the hook for this, but they don't tell anybody that, so that's not going to be something you necessarily get out of, a giant meeting with 30 people in it. Right. And you mentioned on one-on-ones and I personally, I love one-on-ones.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to get one-on-ones with executives, certain depends on the company. Obviously some people are easier to get a hold of, but even if it's at a large company, you can get one-on-ones with their assistants or with their colleagues or with their reports or so, you know what I mean? And so there's just so much opportunity, I think, for designers to have empathy for the people that they're presenting to. And I think at the end of the day, it's maybe just empathy for your audience, like whoever you're presenting to. In that example that you brought up, they're educating as if like, they're the ones that have all the answers and the CFO's an idiit.
And
And
that's how it
it's
makes
just
people feel.
exactly. And it's such a patronizing thing. Right. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but the empathy for
I do.
the people that you're presenting to, that you're trying to convince, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I mean, this is not criticism. It really isn't. Like I said at the beginning, we're doing exactly what we're taught to do. And please understand, I learned all this the hard way. I learned all this through broken noses. Okay. Like I alluded to at the beginning and for far too long. All right. It took me 5 or 6 years before it was like, okay, oh, now I get what's going on here. When you say, I tell people all the time, I want to eradicate the word educate from our vocabulary when we talk about clients, when we talk about stakeholders, when we talk about people outside our discipline. No matter how well-intentioned you are, no matter how pure your heart is, it comes across as you're dumb. I need to educate you.
Yeah.
That's a fact. Okay. We're all human beings are sensitive, period. Everybody, no matter how tough their exterior is or how, professional and cold and whatever, I'm telling you, people are sensitive. The minute you say, I need to educate you, here's UX 101, here's all the shit you need to know, you're done. The other thing that happens is that people who are busy are like, okay, are you telling me, like when they see like customer journey maps, for example, they look fantastic. They're beautiful. They're detailed, and we know they're relevant, and we know how valuable they are. There are plenty of people in an organization who look at that and go, in order to understand any of this, I'm going to have to read all of it. And there's no way that's happening.
Right.
So they're off immediately. But to your point, it is empathy. Okay. And it doesn't mean you don't care about users. I've said this before. I said it today when I was promoting this event. Job one is to care about other human beings, period.
I love that.
So are we here to advocate for users? Of course we are. Of course we are. But you have to recognize the reality of the game that you're playing. And the reality is, unless you can convince a lot of people in positions of power and leverage and who hold purse strings that this is also in their best interests to help these users, to make things better for users, you're going to have a hard battle.
Yeah.
Hard battle.
Yeah.
We don't have to like that. Okay. Personally, I don't like it. There's a whole lot about business that is, because it involves money, is automatically skewed, weighted toward things that we feel like, man, I mean, this kind of sucks. Yeah. It does. But you can overcome it. I'm living proof that you can overcome it. Okay. You can play both sides of that coin, but you have to play both sides. You can't just play the user side. You have to play the business side as well. So, which means you need to get to know these people. You need to get to know where this company is spending its money, why it's spending its money there, where its budgets are. If you're working on a project, you need to know what that project budget is. You need to know where that money comes from and what's being sacrificed in order for it to be where you are. You need to know the margin on what you're working for. A lot of times companies have 6 product lines or service lines. 3 of them are ridiculously low margin. So the company's not going to throw a lot of time and money and effort at those things simply because they don't return.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're arguing for this much work on a low margin project, you're never going to get it, ever. You're better off taking that energy and redirecting it towards a place where you can actually do some good for people.
I love it. So let me ask you this. All right. So we talked about relationships. We talked about empathy for these people. In the
Yeah.
past, I've done some stuff where we do, stakeholder engagement and mapping and
Yeah.
communication plans, things like that. Something I heard recently was somebody they like to do not personas for these, but profiles. Like this is what they care about. This is how,
Yeah.
because again, thinking about empathy, going back and saying, Beth, the CFO, does not like such and such. She appreciates these things. So please avoid talking about this, or please
Yes.
avoid educating her, right?
I love it.
That's the kind of stuff. And so before you go and you know these things, you read these things, and maybe you review it with others and make sure that it's right. But I'm curious, stuff like that. I'm curious, are there tools that you like to use for designers to help build this empathy? Tools being, it could be conversation is a tool, you know what I mean? But like just things in general that people can start to do if they're not doing it already to better prepare for those important conversations.
Oh yeah, there are tools. My tools are all conversational, right? And I keep thinking I should develop some sort of toolkit for this kind of stuff. And actually have a note in front of me to try and do that this year as a course or workshop or something. Anyway,
That's awesome. I love it.
It's a lot of questions and it's a lot of conversation. If you don't have an audience with that person in particular, you ask the people around you who know that person. For example, I often get brought in as a sort of a subcontractor, right? Where the end client is not who's hiring me. The end client is one step removed. If I know I'm going to be in front of these people, which I often am, I ask a hell of a lot of questions up front about like, okay, what are their, like you just said, what are their sticking points? What raises this person's blood pressure? Right? What kinds of things? Like, tell me about the friction is what I'm asking for. Right? And they'll tell me, well, one day we were doing this and it was great and everybody was on board. And then we showed these low fidelity wireframes the next day and they lost their minds. And then they lost confidence in us. And then everything after that was a battle. All right. So I need that information. Okay. Because now I know not to tread there. No matter, for some clients, for example, no matter how you explain lo-fi anything, even if it's a sketch, their mind goes, it's going like this. And once people are there, if people have hangups like that, you can't move them from that position at all. It's the same reason I don't like to show high fidelity way too soon. Same reason. Someone sees a color and they're like, I don't know that color, and you're having an hour-long conversation about features and functionality. Right. And that person just will not move from their fixation over that shade of blue.
Yep. I've seen it.
All right. Right. So
yep. Yeah.
It's, again, I don't know if they're formal tools, but you got to ask a lot of questions about the folks that you're dealing with. What have they shot down historically? Right. What have they always said no to? What do they get hung up on? What pisses them off? Those are things you stay away from.
Yeah.
And the other, sometimes I just sit and listen as well. One of my things, and I've said this publicly plenty of times, is what I always want with a new client is day one, I want everybody in the room, all department heads, VPs. I want as many people in that room as possible. Why? Because I kind of want their shit on the table. Okay. Whatever it is, whatever their hangups are, whatever they're gunning for, whatever they're mad about, I want it to come out. It needs to come out. Because it's going to show up later. And people will tell me, oh, no, that person is really only tangentially involved. They don't need to be there. I'm like, they need to be there because they're going to show up eventually and drop bombs, and that's what happens. You're 6 weeks in and this person shows up to a meeting and you're like, and you are who?
Right. Yeah.
And they throw a massive wrench in the works. So you're just trying to find out what everybody's hangups are. I make notes when clients are talking amongst themselves, when people in the departments are talking amongst themselves, and there's a sticking point about something, and one person keeps coming back to, but I understand, but we kind of told the market, this, and I'm starting to see a pattern. A promise was made somewhere to somebody that nobody in this room is aware of. I got to find out what that is.
Right. Yeah.
Because we're screwed if we can't figure that out.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. Yeah, I love that. And I think one thing that's interesting, and this is sort of an interesting contrast between consultant and internal teams. where a consultant's sort of hired to come in and save the day. Like, that's your job. You're like, we have a huge problem. We got to bring an outside person. And what I found, because I've done a lot of consulting versus internal, and what I found is, as consultant, people listen, people take your word, people are willing to have the conversation. Oh, you're the consultant. Let me book some time with you and we could chat. On the other side of that, what I've seen as an internal, and I'd love to get your thought on how internal teams can manage this. But as an internal employee, I will get railroaded. I'll get sidestepped. I won't be included in meetings. People will ignore my meeting requests, things like that. And I'm curious, is there some kind of way that internal teams can sort of approach this as if they were the consultants coming in to save the day? I just like, it's sort of a weird, because obviously every context is different, every company is different, every team is different, obviously. But
of course,
I'm curious, are there things that like internal teams could do that maybe they don't have that authority? That's maybe the difference, is the consultants have that authority.
Yeah, they don't.
How do the internal teams handle that from your perspective?
Well, for example, I mean, there's a talk that I give. It's called "Think Like a Leader, Even If You Aren't One." Mm-hmm. You can and should act as a consultant. Some of that is, I don't want to call it courage because it's the wrong word. You have to be your own advocate. All right. People don't know what your value is. That's one of the illusions we labor under, is that people in-house automatically know what our value is. They don't. They have no idea.
Right. Yeah.
They really don't. So part of this is you have to find a way to loudly and publicly celebrate your successes as they relate to outcomes. Okay. We made this tiny little change to something and it engendered this. You know that happened. No one else knows that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you kind of have to start tooting your own horn, but you have to do it in a way where it's not about UX. It's not about product design. It's not about best practice. It's like, look, here's what we're helping you be or do or have. That's my big thing. Now, the other thing I want to say is this. There are plenty of organizations, because I've been inside some of them. I've been asked to work with some of them, where that dysfunction can't be transcended.
Mm-hmm.
Can't. There's a wall there. They're going to shut you out. And you're not getting anything, period. No matter how hard you try. That is a thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are plenty of times where you have to resign yourself to two things. It's number one, where can I make an impact that I feel good about? Okay. And you throw away best practices. You say, all right, fine. We can't do research. Fine. We're not doing research. Who gives a shit? Mm-hmm. What can I do so that at the very least, I feel better about the time that I'm spending doing these things? It really does become about you at that point.
Yeah.
If the mountain's not going to move, stop banging your head against it. And also in situations that are toxic, which is a whole other ball of wax, the answer there is sooner or later you got to get out, which means that you start approaching your job in a couple ways. And I do want to talk about this because it's important. Number one, you adopt the mentality that the most perfect ending has to be is done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you don't wrap yourself up emotionally in what you're doing. And you also look for opportunities. If you're going to expend effort for people who are just flat out disrespectful to you, expend it in places where you're going to have something you can talk about in a portfolio, quite frankly. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's the other part of this. When it goes south and there's no winning, and sometimes that is the way it is, you got to start looking inward and like, okay, this is about me. It's about how do I exist in this job right now? And how do I make it so that I've got some things in line to go to the next job?
Yeah. I love that. This is some bit, but no, that's perfect. Cause I was gonna add on to some of this if I can be so bold, but I think what you said, it's all about you. And I think when you run into those situations where you just cannot change the people that you work with, and I'm actually just looking at some of the comments with Deborah, I think this sort of kind of speaks to some of what she's talking about and actually I'll go ahead and read it real quick. It's just, for me, you're preaching to the choir. I've done all this already. I did it all along, and I did it from day one. The first UX design job I ever had. And no matter how much empathy I had for the business, it was like real UX was 100% suppressed anyway. So she goes on, and I think she's speaking this. So something that this is kind of my perspective, 'cause I've been in this situation myself as well. Do what you can.
Yeah.
to change things. And I think
Yep.
personally, individual contributors have a lot of control to influence how their teams work. But at a certain point, it just stops working.
Yes.
You just say, screw it. What do you need me to do? I'm getting paid every 2 weeks. And
Correct.
I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think there
Agreed.
is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think part of the problem designers, and this is, I think goes back to the ultimate sort of headbutting all the time, is design is going to change the world. Design is going to solve all the problems. Design is going to be, the answer to every single thing that could fall ill to the business. And that isn't going to happen all the time. And
No.
and so some of us are going to end up on teams where you just say, screw it, I'm getting paid, and you check out and you do the bare minimum. And I don't think there is anything wrong with that. It might not be sustainable long term for your career, and it's probably going to atrophy at some point if you do that for years and years and years. But for 6 months, learn to play guitar, learn a new
Yeah.
language,
Yeah.
build a bunch of Legos, hang out with your family,
I'm
and
with
just
you.
enjoy yourself, And so, I don't know. I think just the quitting, just quitting with no backup plan, unless you've got a runway, especially if you got a family, kids.
Oh yeah.
I got mortgage, kids. There's no way I can't. So,
Exactly.
I've got to get paid and everything else. And so at least use that paycheck to finance your job search at the very least, or use that paycheck to finance a side hustle, or use that paycheck to finance something else. Lex Roman, actually, she's hanging out here. She told me something a couple of weeks ago, and I thought this was brilliant, but there's a lot of founders that will go and build their own thing, and they have full-time jobs, but they call it their outside funding, which I just
Sure.
love that. And I just every time I think about it, it makes me smile. But that's another thing that you could do. And so anyway, I just love that. So we've been talking for a little bit, real quick. Let's get back to the Byrds. We are trying to raise some money for the Byrds. They lost their house, $250,000 they are trying to raise. I want to give a shout out real quick. Let's see. Taylor, $200. Thank you so much, man. That is amazing. Jen, Victoria, we got an anonymous donation in there. Thank you so much. We are trying to raise $1,000 today for the Byrd family. Anything that you could give would be incredibly, incredibly, incredibly appreciated. And please check out the QR code here. There's a link in the comments on the post, or the description, wherever it is, for the GoFundMe. Anything that you can give would be greatly appreciated. You don't have to give right this second. You could wait, but we would really appreciate that. I love this thing that we're doing, mostly because I've been through hurricanes myself, growing up in New Orleans, insane amount of hurricanes. A lot of people, they default to donating to something like the Red Cross. I don't think there's anything wrong with donating to Red Cross, but that money goes to a giant multi-million-dollar corporation,
It's
and
not
that money
direct.
eventually trickles down. The GoFundMe goes directly to these families, and they get it. And so that is beautiful, and it's tax-free, and they get all of it. So I love that. Joe, I don't know if you got anything to add to that, but thank you, everybody, for donating. I really appreciate it.
No, same thing. And again, I've been through a tornado when I was younger. I had an uncle whose house burned to the ground. It was one of the most terrible things I think I've ever seen. And I think there's a stigma around LA in particular, where it's like, well, these are all rich people that lost their houses. Yeah. Not even remotely true. Okay. People are suffering because they're in circumstances where it's just, they don't have that cushion. They don't have the ability to bounce back. And so, when you say any amount is helpful, I'm just going to reiterate that. Any amount, whatever it is. Okay. Don't get hung up on, oh, well, this is too low or whatever. Anything. Okay. Anything. I think that one of the most powerful and best uses of our time is to try and help other people. Right. So what Lex and Hangzhu and you are doing here is, I want to salute all three of you as well, because it's, again, what can we do? I don't know, but we can do this.
Absolutely.
Right. So I want to say thank you to everybody who's donated, everybody who's here with us, and everybody who's helped spread the word.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you. And again, shout out to Lex, shout out to Hong. I have done nothing except for show up and talk to some people for a little bit. But Lex and Hong, they have been putting this entire thing together. And so I just cannot thank them enough. This is amazing. Yesterday we talked about leverage with Elizabeth Alley, and I just can't think of a better use of the leverage that this community has to raise. I think Lex mentioned earlier today it was almost 2,000. I think we're probably over that at this point now, but we're doing such good things, and I feel so incredibly thankful to be a tiny little part and humbled to be a tiny little part of this group. I love it. All right, so Joe, we've got you for another 20 minutes now. Anybody that's listening today, hanging out, please, if you've got questions for Joe about how the business, how designers can work more. I guess I don't know what's the right word. Better. We'll just say better. Work
closely,
better,
more collaboratively.
Closely, more that was the word.
Turning combat into collaboration. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. You know, it's funny. I actually talked to Tom Griever. I had him on my show, I don't know, a couple, I guess 6 months or so ago. And we talked about this. It's funny you mentioned this, and we kind of hit on the fight. I'm going to fight for this. The language that we use, I don't think is helpful.
No.
You know, is this the hill we want to die on? Like, nobody's dying for UX decision. I can tell you, I'm not dying for UX decision. I love my users, but I am not dying for anybody. I promise. No. But the language, I'm curious. I just want to hear from you, like the language that we use. I'm curious if you have a perspective on this, because you started to talk about it.
And here's, I was going to say this before and it slipped my mind, but now it's back. Part of the problem with the hero language that we use, okay, and the sort of sense of, and it is kind of a hero thing, right? Like we're advocates, we are all that. I'm not negating any of that. But part of the problem with this is the downside for a lot of people who are in situations where they can't do UX by the book. They can't do UX as it is in all these articles and diagrams and YouTube videos and courses and university programs and boot camps. They can't do it that way. And there's not just a few of them. There's a lot of them. The majority of people that I interact with in some of the biggest companies in the world, in some cases, can't do it that way. And what happens is they feel like failures. They internalize that. It's emotional. It's hurtful. Okay. And people really beat up on themselves and feel this very severe inferiority complex. Because there are people online in particular constantly beating down their door and if you're not doing this, it's not real UX. I implore all of you listening right now, if you've ever had the urge to do that, please stop.
Yeah.
It hurts people. Okay. Yeah. In situations where they don't have control or power, you know, like the situation that you read about, you know, Debbie, that's true for a lot of people. So number one, we need to stop this. But that is part of the problem. The way we talk about it is as if we are the arbiters of truth. We talk about this as if we're the center of the universe.
No.
In business, we're not. We're absolutely not. The center of the universe in business is money. Like that, don't like it, I don't care. It's still the truth. Okay. The only reason a corporation exists is to make money. They pay your salary. Users don't pay your salary. Business does. Okay. Which means you're on the hook to their best interests. That is the gig. We don't have to love that. It is still a fact. Now, again, I'll say again, can you do great things for users? Of course you can, and you should. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we got to stop this thing about, well, this is the right way. And it's not real design or real product design or real UX. Like,
yeah.
My blood pressure goes up 8 million degrees when I read this stuff. It's like, come on, let's stop this.
Yeah.
It's not helpful.
Kind of, not at all. It reminds me of something that I hear a lot. I do a lot of like mentoring on ADP lists and things like that. And I get a lot of people who are aspiring designers. They want to be designers and they're trying to do career shift or whatever. And the first question I usually ask these people is, why do you want to be a UX designer? And the answer, I'm sure you've heard this, is you usually get the similar answer, is something to the effect of, I like to solve problems.
Yes.
As if we're the only team on the software team that solves problems, right? Like the product managers aren't solving problems, engineers aren't solving problems, QA people aren't solving problems, customer support people aren't solving problems, the CEO isn't solving problems. You know, like it's funny. It's like, well, have you thought about any of those other careers? Because you don't need to be a UX designer to solve problems. And this goes back to what you just said about us being the center of the universe, as if we are the only team who can solve someone's problems. Everyone else is so inept that they can't do it. And it just drives me crazy. And it's like, we mentioned this about education before. I feel like it's very similar to that. Like, well, I'm here to solve the problem. Oh, the UX team, like here's the UX team solving problems. Yeah,
I'm here to save the day.
Like, yeah.
There's a cartoon character that was the
Mighty Mouse
song. Right.
Yeah, Mighty Mouse. Yeah. That was people of a certain age would know Mighty Mouse. I don't know.
Right. We're old.
Kids today, they don't know Mighty Mouse.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, right? And I'm going to tell you something. One of the things I love about what I do, and I mean love in all capital letters. When there's a bunch of people together solving problems, right? Digging through stuff and saying, all right, how do we fix this? And number one, what's really wrong in the first place? I'm on a team right now. It's a government client. And there's all sorts of people in all sorts of disciplines. And we're all together a couple times a week. And it's hard stuff. Okay. This is complex, data heavy stuff. And it's joyful though. And what's joyful about it is that all the different perspectives of all these people and all their different areas of expertise are bringing out things that, like, I constantly have moments where, like, I didn't even think of that. And it's exciting when that happens. I love having all these people in the room. And I don't care what their disciplines are. I feel like that's when stuff gets exciting. This is when it gets good. When we're all rowing in the same direction toward the same goal. We're all doing it in very different ways. We're all bringing our own experience and toolkits and expertise to bear. But man, I love that. I love it. I mean, and I think some of the reticence to do that is kind of like, it's fear-based. It also stems from the fact that we're not traditionally as respected as other positions inside a company. So there's this thing of like, well, I have to prove my worth as well, right? And I get that too. But there's a lot to be said for true collaboration. And again, with the caveat that you're going to meet some people who are just not going to play nice with you.
Yeah.
They won't.
Now, let me ask you this.
It
Thinking
sucks.
back, yeah, for sure. Thinking back to what we said earlier about education, and we go through generally the art school, and a lot of these other people, they go through business school, maybe MBAs and advanced degrees, things like that. I'm curious, do you think that, and maybe it's hard to answer this question because I feel like everyone's personalities might be different, but do you feel like maybe some of that not valued, that feeling of not being valued, one, is coming from the people who have gone through business school and see us as like artsy fartsy, don't take us super seriously, but then also maybe a bit of imposter syndrome where we've gone through those programs and we don't feel sufficient because we haven't done it. It might be a mix of both. I'm curious your thoughts there. Do you have what's your perspective on that?
I think both those things are accurate. And I think the second one, especially, is worth talking about. And I'll say this out loud. I've said it plenty of times before. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm 56 years old. I have had imposter syndrome all my life. I still have it now. All right. That's a thing. That is part of who I am. It's there. Like, there's this other whatever. And it's like, okay, you have to sit there and be quiet because I have shit to do right now. It's there. So every single time you take on a new project, every time you're in a room with people you haven't met before, which for me is like almost all the time, you're pushing through this moment of like, what am I doing here? Like, this is all right. And especially when it's complex, right? If it's government or it's healthcare or it's financial services, or you can get knee deep into stuff really quickly where I feel like the train is gone and I'm not on it. Like, holy shit, you have these moments of like, can I do this?
Yeah.
Despite my experience, despite what I've done in the past, despite my accomplishments, none of it means anything in that moment. It's, I don't know if I can do this. And you kind of have to sit with it and just be patient and keep saying, all right, just listen, learn, listen, learn, listen, learn. Mm-hmm. My thing is either you win or you learn. I tell myself that all the time. And you just give yourself some grace to work through it. And so part of being effective is working through that fear. And we don't talk about this very much. Okay. Yeah. But I think it's important. You don't just magically ever have all the answers. One of the questions I get constantly, whether it's comments on my courses or it's in coaching sessions or it's in people I'm working with, or it's via email or direct messages or whatever, is younger UXers and designers in particular want answers. Like, how do I do this? What's the right way to do A, B, and C? Or how do I figure out? There's always going to be some messiness in the figuring out process. There's always going to be a component of you don't have the answers. Why? Right. Because this job is not about knowing. It's about finding out.
Oh, I love that.
One of the first things I say to clients all the time especially when it's more in the prospecting phase, right? Because they want to know about what I do and how I do it. I say, I need you to understand something. I am not omnipotent. I'm not ever going to be the smartest person in the room. I'm not necessarily the quote unquote expert. What I have is I have a lot of time over the target. I've got a lot of experience. I've seen a lot of what works and a lot of what doesn't. And I've been fortunate enough to be doing it this long where my successes outweigh, my failures. So my greatest asset to you is to get everybody to look and explore places that you're just not going to see. Okay. There's a line of sight that you simply don't have, period. And that's why you're bringing an outside anybody to do anything. It's why I hire people to do things that I can't do myself, right? My value is I can help you clear the obstacles. I can help you clear, clean up the Vaseline on the lens, whatever it is. And that's what we're going to do. But don't ever get the idea that I'm going to magically have all the answers to your problems. Those answers are going to come from me asking you a lot of questions. And some of those questions are going to make you uncomfortable. All right. But this is the job. Despite what you've heard, this is how this works. All right. It's never been any different. And I think that we're hard on ourselves as a result of that. There's great uncertainty in this job, and you have to be comfortable with that. And I think it's a hard thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it's good. I don't even remember what the question was, to be perfectly honest. But it's interesting because you think about, like, especially startups, you hear this a lot, is, thrive in ambiguity. Yeah. Which is funny because, like, as if that's just something that happens to startups, like big companies don't have ambiguity too. But, it's like such a nebulous term. It's like thrive in ambiguity. What does that even mean? But I think you like really hit at the heart of that is like, you're never going to know. You're never going to have the answers. You're never going to have a clear direction, clear line of sight. Maybe junior designers, somebody's going to tell them exactly what to go do. But the farther up you get in your career, the less and less action items you're going to get, and the more and more you're going to be responsible for investigating those things. So I think that hits on that specifically. And like I said, I don't even remember what the question was, but it was a good answer. Whatever the question was, it was a damn good answer. Cool. All right, so Joe, we've got about 7 minutes left before we're ready to get out of here. I know you have a hard stop. You got a bunch of meetings you got to run to. Any closing thoughts before we get out of here and give the Byrd family one more shout out, get you guys to donate some money to the Byrds? Any closing thoughts about the business?
I think the biggest thing is a lot of what we've talked about today. The part I want you to take to heart, all of you, is that none of this is out of your reach. Okay. Having that knowledge, being able to talk to people on a level that's more business. I think a lot of folks are intimidated by that, or they're like, I don't know anything about that world. I think you know more than you think you do. All right. And I also think that you can have very different conversations with people. And in most cases, you can put yourself in a position where you are seen as more than an order taker, more than the person who makes it pretty. It's a matter of having different conversations. Ask questions about profit margins. Ask questions about budgets. Ask questions about money. Ask questions about how much effort, is worth putting into this. Like, that's a question I ask all the time to clients. Like, what's worth doing here? And they'll say, what do you mean? I say, well, what's worth doing? What's the outcome of this work going to be first? Let's talk about that first, so we can decide what's worth tackling and what isn't, right? If we're going to spend the next 4 weeks doing work, we want it to be something that's going to give everybody, users included, customers included, something that they care about. So reframe your conversations. Start there. Start every conversation you have about anything with, why is this worth doing? And invite everyone around you to explore it. Before you prescribe anything, before you say we need to do research, before you default to, here's the UX process. All right, start with that. Just have conversations. These are a bunch of human beings in the room. Figure out where everybody's head is at, right? And heart is at, and where their pressure is, and what they're worried about. Like, that's a big one. If a stakeholder's pushing, right, we got to do it my way. It's a good time to step back and say, what are you worried about if we don't do it the way you're talking about? I hear you, I'm listening, but what are you worried is going to happen if we don't do it this way? That's the answer that you need to determine whether or not it's worth discussing, right?
Yeah.
Because if they throw out something that is and they give you a good reason, like, look, if we don't do it this way, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be a ripple effect with these people, these stakeholders, and these people at our client's office. All right, then you say, okay, I get it. I'm with you. And you let it go. It saves you a lot of aggravation as well. So it's just going about what you do in a different way. And the last thing I want to leave everybody with, because I know we're running short. None of this, okay, when you're being told no, when there's opposition, when there's friction, when there's whatever, none of this is a reflection of your ability to do this job. None of it. Okay?
Preach.
9 times out of 10, that has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
You cannot take opposition or friction or argument as a judgment on your capability, on your talent, or your worth. It is none of those things. It is somebody else's something. That's theirs, not yours.
I love it. Beautiful, beautiful way to close this out. Joe, thank you so much for coming on today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on last minute, rearranging your schedule to come on.
Why not?
Why not? This is for a great cause. I really appreciate that. So far we have raised almost $1,000. We do two. Like I say, I'm not good at math. That's why I became a designer.
Awesome.
200, 300.
Thank you all.
Yeah, we've raised like $600-700. Taylor, thank you so much for your $200 donation. Right now, I think, Taylor, you're in the running to get all the stuff we're giving away. If anybody wants to beat out Taylor, I'm sure he wouldn't mind. Let's see, $225. Anybody want to give $225? I need like, I'm not very good at
You need to be an auctioneer. $225.
But yeah, so again, the Byrds, they lost everything. I know we're joking around right now, but this is very somber. This is serious. Lots of other people are losing homes. If you want to give to other people, please give whatever you can give. People, especially in Altadena, we can post an article. Lex sent me a really great article. Altadena, especially, is a historically Black neighborhood. I think 8 out of 10, from what I read, are actually homeowners. 8 out of 10 families are homeowners, which is twice the national average in Altadena. And that is devastating that they have lost their homes. And I can't imagine what that is like. That is just insane. And if you could give anything to help these people get back, anything helps. The Byrds. But if, again, lots of other families were donating to this week. So please, 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 anything you can give would be appreciated.
Agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
So Joe, thanks again for coming on. Make sure to check out Joe, givegoodux.com. Follow him on LinkedIn. Lots of great insights. Taylor, if nobody beats you, looks like you've so far you're on top. We will reach out with some stuff for you later today. Again, thank you to Hong, Lex, all the people who have come on this week. I don't even want to begin to name them because I'm going to forget somebody. But you guys have been amazing, and I am absolutely humbled to be a part of this. Joe, thank you again. We will talk soon. We'll get you on Beyond UX Design on an official episode one of these days. We gotta schedule that meeting. I know we had a talk a few weeks ago. All right, Joe, I'm going to let you run. Thanks so much, man. This has been amazing. I am going to get out of here.